When we think of the English, we think of an island race with a history of independence and a reputation for coming up with world-beating ideas. But that isn't the whole story.
England is a mongrel nation, a nation that has been shaped by invasions and then immigrations for over 2,000 years. But the third force that has helped shape England into the great nation it is today is the infusion of foreign ideas. Now, we like to think of ourselves as an inventive people whose best ideas have been maybe taken up by other people and then maybe improved. But over the next hour, I'll be finding out how many ideas that we think of as English are in fact ideas from overseas that we've nicked and now call our own.
From the Royal Navy with its firepower, to what we wear and how we worship, from the industry of celebrity to personal hygiene. All of these ideas we nicked from abroad. Along with the monarchy and parliament, the Church of England is one of the most important and powerful institutions in our history. Our church and our state are inextricably linked. The monarch is the head of both and crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The bishops still sit in the House of Lords, and more of us describe ourselves as C of E than any other religious group. The Church of England has shaped our history and helped form our national character. But despite its name, it isn't English at all, no. It's based on ideas that came from Europe in the 1500s. Before then, going to church in England was a bit like this. Santiago de Compostela. I can pronounce it, and not really with a Spanish accent, though. I'll try it again. Santiago de Compostela. That's where we are. Northwest of Spain, and it is the third most sacred Catholic place in the entire world. The first being Jerusalem, which is a big Catholic place, but they've run out of them now, full of Islamic people and Jewish people, so that's another little war going on there. Second place is Rome, where it's all quietened down now. The Pope comes out, he's wheeled out and goes, hello, in many languages, very good, well done, Pope. And the third is Santiago de Compostela, very sacred for the Catholic people. And we've come here because we're trying to get an essence, a feel of what it might have been like in England, because England years ago used to be a hugely Catholic country. Oh yes, top of the Catholic hit parade. At the start of the 1500s, the church was the richest institution in the country, and roughly 1 in 50 people in England were members of the clergy. The Pope was so fond of Henry VIII, he gave him the official title of Defender of the Faith. So if England was a hugely pious and Catholic country, what does that mean? Well, 1, we were hugely into pies, which is great, and 2, we were very Catholic. We weren't Protestant at this point. We were Catholic. We didn't really choose anything. We just had lots of churches, lots of twilly bits, lots of saints around the place, priests in big robes, swinging those incensed handbags for all they're worth. So what's it like to have been in England when it was a Catholic country? The biggest difference was in the way we worshipped. In the Protestant religion, anyone could talk to God wherever they want, even in the toilet. But in Catholic England, access to God was much more strictly controlled. To get to him, you had to go through a convoluted church hierarchy from the Pope through the bishops, priests and monks. You couldn't even ask God directly to forgive your sins. You had to do it via a formal confession to a priest. Services were in Latin, a language you probably didn't speak, so communion was something you experienced but did not necessarily understand.
In the pre-Reformation church, the Mass is the central act of worship. The Mass which is said ideally every day, certainly every week in each church, and which the people come to see, not to participate in. They'd only receive communion themselves once a year. But the Mass, the ritual of it, the elevation of the host when the priest holds the consecrated wafer above his head for the people to see as he stands with his back to them. This is the central moment of Catholic worship.
The robes, the incense and the plain chant are all part of the ritual. guy in the dark glasses, he daddy cool.
As well as a convoluted church hierarchy on earth, there was also one in heaven. Below God, there was a vast array of saints and angels you could pray to and ask for help. Their images appeared all over churches, which were covered with ornate statues, figures, and decorations. Adoration of the saints was a crucial part of Catholic worship. There was a saint for every occasion. Here is Jeff. Jeff is one of the wise men of the apocalypse, because we had 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in England. That's what I knew about. And these are the 12 wise men of the apocalypse, which I didn't even know about. And this is one, I'm calling him Jeff. He probably has a different name. You can see his nose has gone there. But someone's put a bit of eyeshadow on, which is very futuristic. And the hairstyle doesn't really work, so not so wise in my book. But he has here a brick with a class that he can throw at someone if it comes to apocalyptic times. You've got to be, ready with a brick. But even a wise man like Jeff wouldn't have been able to stop the apocalypse that was about to sweep away the Roman Catholic Church of England. In the 1530s, England, which until then had been a pious Catholic country, broke from the Pope and his church and ran away. The impetus for this change came from the defender of the faith himself, Henry VIII. Henry wanted to divorce his first wife to remarry, but the Pope refused to let him. So in 1534 he passed the Act of Supremacy, which split England from the Roman Catholic Church and effectively created the Church of England. Henry was now the head of his own church and he could marry whoever he pleased. But beyond that, Henry didn't make many major changes. For the most part, the church's theology remained pretty similar to the Roman Catholic one. The main changes were in the decor.
The English Virgin, La Virgen Inglesa, what's she doing here in a church in Spain? Well, she was brought by Catholics over from the English church to here in Spain because Henry VIII was ripping all this kind of gold and gilt and carvings and saints off the walls of churches during the Reformation, the reformation of the church. And if you went to church in England in his time, in Henry's time, churches kind of looked like this, but it changed from this to something more like this. Plain walls, plain pews. So a big change, because you've had decades, you've had centuries of going to church and praying with all the gilt and all the stuff on the walls, and suddenly it's very bare.
For financial reasons, as much as theological reasons, Henry started a process that stripped the churches and monasteries of their vast riches. The symbols of Catholicism, the statues and carvings, were ripped from the walls and the altars and smashed to the ground. Churches were defaced by Protestant zealots, and beautiful friezes were whitewashed over, which have only recently been rediscovered.
We lost virtually the whole of English medieval art. If you think of something like the Taliban in Afghanistan blowing up those statues of the Buddha a couple of years ago, this is exactly the same sort of thing as was done in the Reformation.
But the changes to the church that Henry instituted were minor compared to the radical transformation that Henry's son would oversee.
The really revolutionary changes came after Henry himself had died, when his young son became King Edward VI at the age of 9. Henry himself had really only ever wanted to make himself Pope of the English Church and not to do too much in the way of changing the life of the Church. But now, after his death, you had this evangelical clique controlling the English Church, and they proceeded to ram through some really remarkable changes.
Edward and later his sister, Liz I, opened up England to a revolutionary religious movement that was sweeping Europe. The movement was called Protestantism, from the Latin protestatio, meaning objection or a protest. The key figure behind it was a German monk called Martin Luther. In 1517, he nailed a series of theses to a church door that challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and started a debate that shook Europe. Luther's ideas, and later those of a French firebrand called John Calvin, were fundamental in shaping the Church of England, which is ironic, as they weren't English at all. Luther and Calvin wanted to strip away the trappings of religion and reevaluate man's relationship with God. Protestants believed that faith was the key to salvation. not just behaving in ways that the Church approved of. They rejected the authority of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church and attacked its excesses and corruption. For divine guidance, they turned to the Word of God. The Bible was the ultimate source of religious authority. Everyone was encouraged to read it for themselves, and church services were changed so that the ordinary people could understand them. Protestantism was a religion not of statues and rituals, but of the Word.
In remembrance of me. Amen.
Also, the language changes. The services were in Latin, now they're in English. You've got a common prayer book in English, you've got the Bible in English, people are conducting the services in English, and that's a big change. So we lose this focus on all the guilt on the walls, and you gain a focus on the English language. So probably we lose getting a Michelangelo, we gain a William Shakespeare.
It was European ideas that prompted us to translate the Bible into English. This encouraged a literary tradition, because once people could read the Bible, they could read other things too.
The literary revolution, which appears in England in the late 16th and the early 17th century, the age of Shakespeare, Johnson, Spencer, Marlowe, this tremendous outpouring of talent. Although these people may not themselves have been especially committed Protestants, the culture of the word, of the written word, of the spoken word being central to cultural life, which Protestantism brings in, I think is fundamental to understanding this movement. This is why this happens in England.
Protestant ideas didn't just affect religious thinking. They also contributed to the development of English political and philosophical thought.
Protestantism is a much more rebellious, a much more questioning, anti-authoritarian creed than Catholicism is. And the Protestant emphasis on everyone being equal before the Bible, the lack of religious authority, also seems to translate into a skepticism about political authority.
The Church of England might seem like one of the stuffiest, most conventional institutions in the country, but the radical ideas behind it made England what it is today. Central European ideas didn't just affect how we worshipped, but how we thought. But the Church of England is not the only great English institution that has its roots abroad. For centuries, the Royal Navy has been a standard bearer for all things English, and a driving force in our history. It's won us an empire, made us a world power, and kept us unconquered for nearly 1,000 years. But what really made our Navy a force to be reckoned with were French, Italian, and Spanish ideas. In the early 1500s, our navy was rubbish. England was open and vulnerable to invasions from the sea. The Norman conquest in 1066 was the last successful invasion. But the French had made numerous landings on English soil, including one in 1216 and one in 1338.
Invasion across the Channel wasn't difficult in the age before heavy gun-armed sailing ships. It was relatively easy. You wait till the other guys weren't looking, you crept across, you got on the beach, and you overthrew the government.
Henry knew the country needed a strong navy, and that England was weak and lagged behind the rest of the world.
Henry understands that naval technology and military technology are changing fast. And when he comes to the throne, England is behind. England is backward in artillery, firearms, means of production.
Henry realized that to defend England he needed the latest weapon in mass destruction, the cannon. But cannons were only available for mainland Europe, as they were made out of bronze and they were extremely expensive. Henry couldn't afford to buy them, and the English didn't know how to make them. So Henry enticed a French cannon maker called Pierre Baud to come to England. Baud brought revolutionary techniques with him, and many of his methods are still used today. He would cast a cannon by first making a mold. This mould was then filled with molten bronze to make the cannon itself.
What we're going to do is put a steel frame around that now.
Steel frame on top.
Yep, and then fill from the mixer, fill that with sand, that frame.
The sand,
Yep.
okay. So it's just like making keys in those films where you're going to get out of jail.
That's
and
right. Yep, very similar. Similar
except much
process.
bigger, and then you blow things out with it.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yep.
great. Okay,
Good.
let's do it.
Board would have made his mould using clay. We're using sand mixed with a chemical that helps it to harden.
That's it.
Now what?
We let that set now.
Let it set.
Takes about 20 minutes.
Once hardened, the plug's removed, leaving a cavity for the metal to fill.
All the iron comes shooting down here, round this bend, and fills up from here to make our cannon. It's just like making a key, as prisoners do when they're escaping from jail. So what is this that we're painting on here, Bob?
It's a refractory coating which stops the metal penetrating into the sand. If
All
we
right.
didn't coat this mould, you'd end up with a furry casting where the metal goes into the sand.
I haven't got my painting gear on.
Though in Tudor times, Board wouldn't have had the heat-resistant paint or a blowtorch to blow it off with either.
Holy cow. So that's one half the cannon. You put another half of the cannon on top, and then we're going to pour in all the iron, and that's going to make us a cannon. And this is the knowledge that Pierre Baud and other Europeans brought to England to make us the great cannon makers that we became.
It's a big baked Alaska.
Pierre Baud started production of bronze cannon in West Sussex. But Henry still had a problem, because bronze cost so much and had to be imported, meaning cannon was still very expensive. He needed to come up with a cheaper way to make guns, and he found one by using iron instead of bronze. Iron was cheap, it was easy to get hold of in England, and the English were experts at working with it.
JCB time.
Though they didn't use a JCB to move it around.
A load of scrap metal. I think it's this is iron. Hours of fun. It's like being an enormous child.
To make an iron cannon, Pierre Baud joined forces with an English ironworker called Ralph Hogg. In 1543, their combined knowledge allowed them to cast the first ever iron cannon.
Now, I made this iron and steel stuff that's coming out there earlier, and I just got the lads to pour it off. Something I made up earlier. It's kind of like a Blue Peter thing. It's like a huge baking thing.
Yeah.
Dangerous baking. So all that lava, the molten metal coming out. What's the technical thing for this?
The technical term for that is a pisser.
A what?
A pisser.
A pisser.
Yeah. That's where the mould is, the joint's opened and the metal's flown out of the joint on the mould.
That's from the Latin pissario.
That's right.
Pisser thing, great. So on the main thing, if you have a pisser, it doesn't work, then what does it become?
It becomes a shitter.
A shitter. A shitter.
By casting cannon in iron, Hogg and Baud had found a way for Henry to manufacture all the cheap guns he needed. The casting of iron cannon was a turning point in English history. This was immortalized in a poem which passed into folklore, and which completely removed any mention of a Frenchman. It goes, Master Huggett and his man John, they did cast the first cannon. Ralph Hogg has become Master Huggett, and Pierre Baud has sort of become this man John. So the supremacy of the English Navy was founded on technology brought here by the Frenchmen.
And it's a combination of domestic and imported expertise that ends up creating those highly successful iron cannon. Without the foreign expertise, it's not going to happen.
Henry now had a cheap supply of great cannon, and he placed them on forts to defend the land and on ships to rule the sea. But just having guns didn't make the Navy a strong fighting force. They needed tactics. And for these, as with everything else, the king looked abroad.
With Henry VIII, we're looking at a European figure who's open to the ideas of the rest of the world. Henry has huge problems, he has great resources, and he has the ability to pick on all the best things he can find. Every single program of Henry's warfare state has key inputs from abroad.
The next foreign input was to radically change our naval tactics. In the early 1500s, the English fought battles at sea like this. Each ship picked out an enemy ship, sailed straight at it, and boarded it as soon as possible. There was no discipline, few tactics, and no understanding of how to fight with cannon. It was chaos. Ships were just simply mobile platforms for armed men to jump off. By the time Hogg and Board were making iron cannon, Henry had got his hands on something that revolutionized the way the English fought sea battle. It was called the Mariner's Mirror. Although it wasn't a mirror. It was a book written by a Spaniard called Alfonso de Chaves. And by referring to it, the English Navy started fighting like this. The ships sailed in strict formation, in line abreast. The big guns engaged the enemy first and disabled them. Then troopships went alongside, allowing men to board and finish the enemy off. By the late 1500s, the English were masters at fighting at sea. But if the Navy was going to do more than just defend the island, if they were going to travel and trade, the English needed to know how to navigate. And they learnt this from an Italian. The skills that enabled us to make long voyages were brought to us by a man called Giovanni Cobato, but who we, in traditional English style, called John Cabot.
John Cabot was a Genoese who'd been naturalized in Venice and therefore came from both of the great maritime cities of the Mediterranean. He represents the commercial and the navigating history of what in 1500 was a far more sophisticated environment than England. So he's an exotic import. He brings with him lots of ideas, lots of knowledge and lots of experience, which the English, for a number of reasons, don't have. So the reason England doesn't have this knowledge when Cabot arrives is because they don't need it. They're not going anywhere, so it doesn't matter. You can see where France is, and then you can coast along to anywhere else. If you want to go further, you need to get into a new stream of knowledge. And this exotic foreign import is going to give you those things. He's going to give you those skills, those methods, those navigational techniques.
Cabot taught the English the navigational skills that allowed them to travel long distances. In 1497, he headed an English expedition that sailed across the Atlantic, came ashore in Newfoundland, and claimed the first colony of what would become our empire.
It's English ambition, Italian expertise, and that combination gets you all the way to newfound land, which is exactly what they're looking for.
So it was the French, Spanish and Italians who laid down the foundations that allowed the Royal Navy to literally rule the waves.
A navy that begins as a defence force for the island ends up being the dominant force in the politics of the world. And for the next 100 years, down to the First World War, the Royal Navy is the most powerful political instrument on the face of the earth. It determines the outcome of all major events. It ensures that Britain is the largest and most prosperous empire the world has ever seen.
The Navy changed the world, but it also changed us. Our empire opened us up to a wealth of foreign influences that would change our daily lives and challenge our preconceptions about smelly foreigners forever. The Empire covered a fifth of the globe. The sun never set on the Empire. Now, this was an amazing time. We went over to all these other countries. We brought them things. People were impressed. Oh, you wonderful people. Would you like our country to be part of your empire? Oh, yes, please. The popular perception is that through our empire, we civilized the world. We spread English values, decency, godliness, and cleanliness. After all, we're a very clean nation.
I mean, I do have to have a shower every day.
I am a shower man myself.
We shower every day.
I'm a bath man. I prefer to shower, and I shower every day.
Yes, I don't like to go beyond a day without bathing.
And I am a pretty clean person.
But perhaps our attitude towards cleanliness, like so many other things, wasn't something we gave the empire, but something it gave to us. When was the age of empire? Well, it all started sort of slap bang around 1600. Slap bang on 1600, 31st of December 1600, by Royal Charter, the East India Company was set up. 1608, took 8 years to get their stuff together, but we went over, to India, the port of Surat, and we landed there, and we said, my God, we're here to civilize you people. And they said, oh, thank you very much. But contrary to popular opinion, when we arrived in India, we weren't wearing pith helmets and smelling of roses. When we arrived in India, the clothes we stood up in were so dirty, they could have stood up on their own. We were filthy, not only because we'd been traveling, but we were filthy because we were English, and a well-dressed English adventurer would have thought nothing of sweating and sleeping in the same suit for 6 months. We weren't just dirty outside our clothes, we were dirty inside them too. It took a lifetime of grime to create the English adventurer complexion, though this will just take me a couple of hours. I'm sure they would have been slightly scurvy.
Scurvy, yeah. So maybe quite sort of pallid yellow.
I don't know what scurvy looks like. I got a bit.
Things like cold sores as well.
In the 1600s, the English population were just like teenage boys. They just didn't see the need to wash. Queen Liz I reputedly had only 1 bath a year, and ordinary people would have washed their bodies even less often. And because they didn't wash from year to year, the English adventurers didn't just look dirty. Oh no, they smelled like Boo Man. When they arrived in India with their eyes fixed on the rich business opportunities before them, the Indians smelt them coming. After 6 months, here we are, India!
We've been brought up to imagine the British in India as fully fledged Victorian Sahibs with a solo topi lording it over Indians. And it comes as quite a shock when you read the very early records to see quite how little kudos, how little prestige the early British had.
In here I've got this bottle of smell. Now this is, we've had this specially made up. This is the kind of smell I should have. Smell that. Go.
These early Englishmen are turning up in Surat. And, you know, they can't get an interview with the governor of the town, never mind access to the Mughal emperor.
Excuse me. Oh, hello. You're in a rush, but I could just, if you just... I've come from England in the 1600s. Excuse me, can I ask you a question? It's just, all right. Excuse me, can I ask you something?
No.
The early English in Surat, in their very first base on the coast of India, had problems by the fact that they were too smelly and unhygienic to do business with.
This is how we smelt in the 1600s.
Oh, blimey. It's not very nice.
Oh, it stinks. Oh, God. That's fairly revolting. What is it?
I mean, this clearly was a commercial problem.
Describe that smell.
Urine. Probably urine is probably...
Urine.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I can't smell anything.
Bad. Bad? Yeah. Any adjectives more than bad?
The plague.
Smells like the plague.
Yes.
There we go.
Rotten socks that have been on for weeks.
Rotten socks that have been on for weeks. Disgusting and vile. That's how we smell in the 1600s,
That's
you see.
diabolical. I can't smell it. That's unbelievable.
Diabolical, that's like the devil, isn't it?
Yes.
Pretty vile stench, because we've got diabolical, urine, and socks that have been on for many months.
Gosh, you know, it is a bit...
It is.
It is a bit like a sewer.
When we arrived in India, or in my case, the East India Club in St. James, we were the smelly foreigners. When it came to personal hygiene, the Indians were so far ahead of us, they did things that we didn't even have the words to describe. When we adopted their habits, we also adopted their words. Boy, you can't come in here, you stink!
I think it's also very significant that a great number of British words to do with personal hygiene and to do with bedtime and bed practice and the whole business of getting out of your day clothes and going to bed come from Hindi. So the word shampoo, which in Hindi means massage.
Shampoo is Indian for massage. Remember that.
The word pyjama. These sort of words imply that the British, I think, in the 17th and 18th centuries, would have been used to just sleeping in their day clothes and not taking baths. And so they have to import foreign words when they start this strange practice of washing themselves, of washing their hair with things other than soap.
Shampoo!
and getting into nightclothes. And as they don't have words for these items because it's not part of their usual way of life, they have to import Indian words. And that to me is very significant. You've clearly got a situation where a bunch of smelly northerners, if you like, are being transformed into more civilized, urbane Mughals within a year or two of their arrival.
Oh. Never catch on.
The British in the 18th century were civilized by India, no doubt about it. They went out as rough northerners. They arrived in India and were softened by it.
The influence of empire pervaded all areas of civilized behavior. Through it, we were introduced to a wealth of new customs and habits. It changed how we lived and how we spoke.
Our language, for example, has been greatly influenced by empire and by the introduction of Asian words in particular.
What are the words? Because shampoo was great.
Well, let's think of a sentence, an extreme example. I was in my pyjamas, smoking a cheroot, shampooing my hair before going out for a curry, when a juggernaut crashed through the veranda into my bungalow. Every word almost in that sentence has been derived from Indian languages, from Sanskrit, from Hindi.
So it's bungalow, juggernaut, veranda. What juggernauts do they have?
That's from the Hindi word Jagannath. Jagannath means Lord of the Universe.
So, just if you are out there driving a huge articulated lorry, you are actually driving the Lord of the Universe. I just want to say, for your own personal pride thing. So we do generally think of the idea of England and empire, of giving to the world with all our expertise, but it seems to be a two-way street.
Very much so, and I think in particular before about 1800, we have much more to take from the rest of the world than we have to give. The irony of all this, of course, is that by the end of the 19th century, things have turned full circle. So, for example, British advertisements for soap are very much presenting a message, certainly to the domestic audience, that cleanliness is associated with the export of civilization.
Right.
And images are used of natives or savages, if you like, being presented with bars of soap. So we have conjured up in our mind this notion, I think, of the British sort of striding through Africa with a revolver in one hand and a bar of soap in the other, and a Bible in their knapsack, exporting these values.
What is this? Consumption of soap is a measure of the wealth, civilization, health and purity of the people.
By the beginning of the 20th century, the British have adopted that. They've stolen that idea, and they're now representing it to the world.
So from drinking tea to washing our bodies,
Mild and creamy.
many of the things that we consider to be civilized English behavior were customs we picked up as we traveled the world. The empire changed England as much as England changed the empire. In the early 20th century, the English Empire still covered a fifth of the globe, but English culture had turned its back on the world. The horrors of the First World War and the economic depression of the 1930s all made England increasingly inward-looking, staid and drab. The looming threat of another war with Germany, and when it came the austerity it brought, only made matters worse.
Imagine the scene. It's wartime, it's England. Things are dull and grey, except for the excitement of getting bombed by the Luftwaffe. And the country is poor. We've got rationing. This is an actual ration book, and this is the amount of meat and dairy that I'd have to live on for an entire week. 2 ounces of butter, 3 ounces of cheese, and 4 ounces of margarine. I'm allowed 1 egg a fortnight, I believe.
You lucky boy, yes.
1 egg. I didn't have one last week, so I think I'll have my big egg this week. Thank you very much.
Be gentle.
1 egg there. 3/4 of a pound of meat and 4 ounces of bacon, if you please. Now this is my entire ration for a week, and I'd have to eke that out over a week. And remember, I've been doing this for 2.5 years now. So just imagine what the scene was like in the winter of 1942 when these guys arrived.
The Americans turn up and brighten up our world. Between January 1942 and December 1945, approximately 3 million American servicemen visited here. They were better fed, better dressed, and better paid than their English counterparts, and as well as nylons and chewing gum, they brought fun and glamour like we'd never seen before. And they brought an attitude that changed England forever.
Vibrancy, this life. I think they brought life back into Britain again.
And did you change the way that you were living? I mean,
Change the way we lived.
I mean, they used to hold parties on the bases and things like this. And in some bases, to make ice cream, you'd fly a B-17 up to about 28,000 feet and freeze it and bring it back down for the kids for the ice cream. Oh yeah, they were
and we went to parties on the base.
Tricks.
And that,
they were young. They were young.
And also everything was heightened, it's wartime.
That's right.
How long are you going to live?
Right.
There's no point saying, oh, I better not party tonight.
No.
Look, was the English music different at the time?
Oh yes, I mean you went to an English dance and you done the waltz, the foxtrot and stuff like that. When the GIs moved in, they brought jitterbug.
It may surprise you to learn that this dance is done in Great Britain. And as a newsreel we endeavour to present all the pictorial news, and the news includes anything that is unusual.
Is jitterbug more pulling and throwing and
over your shoulder and under your leg and everything else? And I mean, the English girls loved it, you know, loved it. And I mean, they used to twirl them round.
And there were these wonderful guys walking about in uniforms, and you thought, oh well, you know, that's it. You know, dress yourself up, get yourself clevered up, and you're going to meet one of these and go back to this wonderful place called America.
And so they brought with them
that
relaxed...
They brought that relaxed
atmosphere
with them.
So relaxed atmosphere and sexy, that's got to be beguiling.
That's right, that's right.
And
it brightened the lives of the English people. They brought us sunshine.
It was an impact. They brought and left.
At the end of the war, the GIs went home to America, but they had started a cultural revolution in England that couldn't be stopped. Once we'd been exposed to American influences, the floodgates were opened and American ideas poured into England. America was the home of everything cool. It was where it was at. Whatever they had, we wanted. Which caused a lot of trouble, because the next thing we adopted from the Americans, and we had one in almost every home, was the teenager.
Up until that point, teenagers are just a model of older people. They wore what their dads wore, and they aspired to the jobs that their dads had. Suddenly, teenagers can develop an identity of their own.
The idea of teenagers who had their own fashion, music and heroes started in America and was imported wholesale over here. For a while, English teenagers just copied what the American ones did.
At Waterloo, the king of rock and roll was welcomed by, well, just dig those happy cats and not a square in sight.
Bobby Sox, Bill Haley and Hysteria all hit England in a big way.
Well, I got a little girl who's all right. I like to ride her every night. I tell you one thing, and that's a fact. I really love that pink Cadillac.
But by the 1950s, English teenagers had begun to create their own styles, although they drew heavily on American culture.
Hottest motor I've ever seen. She's got me riding down a one-way street, she's a dream. Well, listen up, honey, 'cause I want to boast.
The first of these were the Teddy Boys.
V8 engine flames of a side. This little girl's got overdrive on board.
Suddenly, it's got this new beat, it's got this new look, it's got these new words, it's got teenagers, it's got Technicolor, it's got all of these things. And most of them are coming from afar. Many of them are coming from America.
Oh boy, she's a dream.
It's only when in the, we say early to mid 1950s that the working class lads got hold of this style. They were earning a lot of money at that time. Employment was good, wages were good. They could afford new clothing.
The jacket comes down below the knuckles with or without a knuckle duster. The tie comes a little bit from cowboy film.
The Robert Mitchum character within Night of the Hunter, fantastic stereotype, you know, completely psychopathic murderer. A lot of the guys took this on board.
And the shoes get kind of bigger so that you can, and with more and more foam on the bottom so that you can creep round brothels noiselessly.
They weren't cheap. They were 59 shillings and a half, like, you know.
The hair is directly taken from the American kind of new habit, which is actually an Italian-American habit of dyeing the locks, of which, of course, you're very proud and are very black, forward into this kind of pompadour, or what became called a quiff.
You can go to the barbers in 1955, 1956 and get yourself a Tony Curtis. The hair came from America.
And yet, the Teddy Boy, he's quintessentially English. They're kind of both at the same time. They're this hodgepodge of bits that they've managed to nick from all over the place, and yet they've retained their English identity. I think that in very much is what that England emerging out of the 50s and into the soon-to-be swinging 60s is like. You can see them as the first flowering, if you like, of a teenage pop youth culture.
And the cultural revolution that the Teddy Boys started just could not be stopped. What England had stolen from the Americans would soon take over the world. We think of England as a pretty cool place that leads the world when it comes to style. But our pop culture has its roots in America. After the Second World War, we copied their clothes, their speech, and above all, their music. This flooded into England and had a massive effect on English kids.
I think they could pick up on that music, they could dance to it, they could make their attempted versions of it, which were never right. Of course they couldn't sound like someone from the south side of Chicago if they came from, you know, the wrong side of Liverpool, or they came from Mile End. But they could become the Small Faces, or the Beatles, or the Rolling Stones, and then they could sell that back to America.
Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones took American sounds, changed them, and made them something new. Their take on American music was so successful that by the 1960s, we were exporting it to them, and they were copying us.
Culturally, in the second half of the 20th century, our greatest strength, and it probably goes way back before that, if you like, is the fact that we're jackdaws. And we adapt and survive culturally better than any other nation. We could take Hollywood cinema, rock and roll, blues and jazz and soul, we could take hip speak, we could take all of these things, and we could start to kind of play with them and make something of our own out of them. So although these things look glamorous and foreign, within about 6 months, somehow they've become very, very English.
Our ability to, let's be honest, steal from other cultures made England the home of cool. When it comes to pop culture, creation and innovation, we lead the world. But however English it seems now, it all started in America. There was one more thing we took from the Americans that's had a profound effect on England in the 21st century. The cult of celebrity.
Now, we can say that the Americans brought us fun, because they brought us teenagers, and they brought us pop culture and rock and roll, and they certainly brought us celebrities. And they've been a leading developer in the industry of celebrity.
There have always been famous people in England, but they were usually posh and well protected from the press. The industry of celebrity has its roots in 1920s Hollywood. It comes from film studios who would show off their stars at glamorous film premieres. The film premiere had reached England by the 1930s, but it took another 60 years for us to fully embrace the celebrity industry. But the cult of celebrity has gradually taken hold, and now we're completely obsessed with it, and a huge industry has grown up to support it. We've got 4 weekly magazines just devoted to celebrity and gossip, and since 1999, their circulation figures have almost doubled.
Now, these people that are waiting here for this premiere, in the sleet and the snow, they're not going to see the film. They haven't got tickets. They haven't been invited. It's an invited premiere. What they're waiting for is to see celebrities going down the red carpet, of which I am but a small cog. I am a small celebrity, maybe on the B list, maybe B+, maybe B-, I don't know, somewhere on the B list. in America, I think I'm more like C-list. I asked an agent once and I said, are the lists like this? And he said, well, now you got your actors who are A+, and then there's all the rest. But I gotta get out here and walk down the carpet, and some people will sort of go, hey, just because it's an idiot walking down the red carpet. Because in this country, we're now as obsessed with celebrity as any country in the world.
Cake or death?
Cake or death?
Yay!
That's a bit of a stand-up. So this is celebrity. It's a very unusual beast. And someone over there, two people said, well, who are you? And hello. So that's what happened.
Eddie! It's right. Eddie, to this camera, mate.
Celebrity now rules the roost. Who knows what's going to happen next? Maybe fish will take over the world.
Thank you. Now, from the foundations of naval dominance to the industry of celebrity, foreign ideas have helped shape the English way of life. But the infusion of foreign ideas didn't stop with the Americans. These days, in most cities in England, you can finish up work, relax with a bit of a yoga session, meet up with friends for an espresso, go out for the evening and eat a Thai meal, and end up dancing the night away to a bit of salsa. That is the Mongrel Nation, and long may it continue.
Join us at the same time next Discovery Sunday for a frightening assessment of bioterrorism in the 21st century. Next tonight, the forensic detectives search for patterns of guilt.